Hi, this is Gene Strickland. I wanted to cover Law of Reciprocity. Law of Reciprocity in photography refers to the relationship between different choices of aperture and shutter speed that result in identical exposure. Now, just so you know, ISO speed, ISO, also has a direct effect on the Law of Reciprocity. But for now, I'm just going to discuss shutter speeds and f-stops, how they directly relate to each other, and we're just going to assume the ISO is set to whatever it needs to be set at, like ISO 100 if you're outside in bright light, ISO 400 if you're inside, ISO 1600 or 3200 if it's evening, whatever that is. So let's move forward. Remember that exposure equals intensity times time. Now you're watching those Mark Wallace videos as well that I chose, and he identifies these a little bit differently. He talks about apertures being the quantity of light, which is fine. I just kind of know that these terms are interchangeable, but make sure you know both methods, on a quiz or test, how he's defined it or how I've defined it. Again, we're just using some slightly different words, but the overall meaning is still the same. So let's talk about your f-stop scale. This is a standard f-stop scale. Now some of those standard f-stop scales will have f1.4 here. Some may go to f32, but typically this is a standard one. Most of you won't even have these last two if you have zoom lenses unless you spend a lot of money on them. Remember, most kit lenses, like your 24 to 70 and 7200, 100 to 300, those kind of lenses typically have a variable f-stop range, like 3.5 to 5.6, which means you can get f3.5 when you're at 24 millimeter, but when you zoom to 70 millimeter, you can only get f4.5 or f5.6 or something like that. That's because to get that same focal length with a fixed f-stop of like 2.8, you're going to pay $2,400 for a Canon or Nikon versus $300 for just a general kit lens. So you're paying for speed, and that's been already discussed. So let's get back to the f-stop scale. This is a full stop f-stop scale. Your camera probably shows you numbers in between here, like f9, f6.3, f19, etc. These are either third or half stop increments. We're not getting into that right now because it's just too many numbers to think about. I want you to know these are full stop increments. Each movement in either direction either doubles or halves the amount of light coming into your lens. And that's really powerful. Imagine your income doubled tomorrow. That's one movement from here to here. Imagine your income halved tomorrow. That's one movement here to here. So when you move two stops, that means you've doubled your income and then doubled it again. Or you're making a quarter as much as you were yesterday if you lost 2 stops worth of income. So these are big movements. So just kind of remember that these are big movements. Memorize these. Write them down. And know what they do. F22, this is the side of the scale that lets in the least light, and it also means virtually everything in your image is going to be in focus. When you're on this side of the scale, it means it's going to let in the most light, and essentially you're going to have one thing in focus and everything else is going to be blurry. If you're in the middle of the scale, that means it's kind of the middle of the road between the two extremes. Memorize the extremes, that way you always know what choices you need to make. Remember, f-stop controls your depth of field. So time is measured in shutter speeds. Now remember, Mark Wallace defines this as duration. Same thing, duration, the amount of time, these are all synonyms, and is typically measured in fractions of a second. Make sure you memorize this standard shutter speed scale. Now, looking at the two scales, they don't seem like they have a strong relationship. Remember, this is a logarithmic scale, which means, well, I won't get into the mathematical definition of what it means. You don't need to know that at this level of the class. A way to memorize it, just note that every other number physically doubles. So if you only remember f2 when you're having to write this down in a quiz, write f2. Skip the next one, then 2 times 2 is 4. Skip the next one, 2 times 4 is 8. Skip the next one, 2 times 8 is 16. And then you think, oh wait, I remember f11. So then you go ahead and backfill in f11. Now divide that by 2. That'd be 5.5. But then you think, whoa, there was no 5.5. But there's a 5.6. Yeah, this is one of those things where it doesn't exactly even up, but mostly it does. Divide that by 2, you get 2.8. Or multiply 11 by 2 and you get f22. So you see how if you can memorize just one number, It's very easy to fill in the blanks by doing simple multiplication or division because it doubles or halves, but every other one. Now, the shutter speed, that's in fractions of a second. So memorize what it does. The thousandth side freezes moving objects. It also lets in the least amount of light. 1 second lets in the most amount of light, and that's a long time in photography world. Now remember, your camera probably goes all the way down to 30 seconds. If you have a timer or bulb, you can leave your shutter open for minutes or even hours if you're shooting astrophotography or night photography. If you paid a lot of money for your camera, you probably have shutter speeds that go up to a 2,000th, 4,000th, 8,000th, even on up to a 10,000th of a second if you're spending $4,000 on your bodies. Now, this is the basic scale, and each movement from one to the other is one full stop, meaning you're either doubling the amount of light or halving the amount of light depending on which way you're moving on the scale. Now in quizzes, I may flip this scale backwards and forwards, but you still need to kind of memorize the scale and what it does. Remember, if this were a pizza and you had one pizza and it's all for yourself, you eat the whole pizza. If you invite a friend over, then you get half a pizza. If you have 4 friends over, you get a quarter of the pizza. You see where I'm going with this. The more friends you have over, the less pizza you're going to get to eat. So kind of remember that. With fractions, the bigger the number in the denominator, which is the part under that diagonal line, numerator's on top for those of you who don't remember your 4th grade math, the bigger the number on the denominator in fractions, the tinier it is. Again, it's an inverse relationship. Remember, all this was based on negative technology back when it was films. So, 1,000th of a second, not much light. 1 second, a lot of light. Let's keep moving. So, just to continue, showing you the units of light and the size of the lens opening. There wasn't enough room to put the F22 over there. This is important because it shows you how when you're doubling, you're letting in double the previous amount. So you're not adding 2, you're multiplying by 2. So 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, becomes 32, becomes 64 times the amount of light. So in just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 stops, you're letting in that many more times of light. Imagine if you were making that many more times income. So, why do you need to learn this? Because we're basically saying you can take a shot 10 different ways. All of them are going to be at the appropriate, proper exposure, but now you have the creative control to take a shot communicating the world as you want your viewers to see it. That's the most important part. Okay, now let's look at this law of reciprocity in practice. I'm going to walk you through one. So, let's say you just picked up your camera, you weren't really paying attention, you said, okay, I know I need to set it to a 60th of a second, because in general I shouldn't hand hold my camera under a 60th of a second. Now again, let me take a side note. Traditionally, photographers have always been taught that you shouldn't hand hold your camera less than the longest focal length on your lens. That will ensure your image will be tack sharp while hand holding. So generally photographers always had a 50mm lens on their camera, so they were told never to hand hold less than a 60th. If you have a 100 to 300mm zoom, you shouldn't be hand holding less than 2/50th, because that extra weight is going to provide just a tiny bit of vibrational movement that will make your image slightly out of focus. Now in the digital world, you'll never see this on your LCD. You're going to all think you're rock stars when you look at the back of your LCD because everything's going to look so great. Everything's been compressed and it's small. Once you get it into Photoshop, you look at it at 100% resolution, or you print it like 8x10 or larger, that's when you really start to see how unfocused your images really are. It's really deceptive. So as you become professional photographers, critical focus is a high priority. So, but with today's technology, digital cameras, Canon has IS in their lenses, which is image stabilization. Nikon has VR, which is vibration reduction. The other cameras have some kind of anti-shake feature built into the camera body, whereas Canon and Nikon have it built into the lenses, which allows you to hand hold 2 to 4 stops under what I'm suggesting. But just know this to be a general truth. If you're under a 60th, you need a tripod, or else it's going to be blurry. It's going to be the same thing as you taking a picture with your iPhone late at night and you wonder why all the pictures are always blurry. That's why. It's choosing a slow shutter speed. So, this photographer just spun the dials, got the meter to point at 0 or that middle line, whatever your camera does to represent proper exposure when you're shooting in manual. So you manually shifted your shutter speed to f2/50th. Now let's pretend your meter broke, because obviously all you've got to do now is spin the f-stop dial and it's going to do the math for you. But you need to know how the math works so your brain can quickly decipher complicated situations and you're not always relying on your camera or your meter, because sometimes your meter will lie to you. So let's start with where you are. You're at a 60th at 5.6, right? And you want to go to 2/50th. Well, where is that? It's towards less light, right? 1,000th of a slice of pizza is a tiny bit of pizza. You never count the number you're on, you count the very next one you go to. So 2 stops towards less light. Well, if your buddy borrows $2 from you, the only way to get even is to get $2 back from him. So, down on the f-stops, if I have 2 stops less light on top, I need 2 stops more light on the bottom. That's going to be this direction, right? 2 stops toward more light. 1, 2. That means I can now take the shot at 2/50th at f2.8. So this shot, 1/60th at f5.6, and the next one I take 1/250th at f2.8, if I take both of those shots standing in the same place at the same time, will look identical as far as their tonality. They're going to look the same as far as all the grays, whites, and blacks in them and the brightness relationships. Nothing's going to change. We've slightly increased our motion control, so if something's moving a little bit, it would be more frozen. But even more noticeably is we've gone from a mid-level depth of field to a very shallow depth of field. So now more of only one thing's going to be in focus, and there's going to be more of a blurriness in the background. Let's move forward. Don't get overwhelmed with this stuff. You're going to be fine. It just takes a while to figure it out. So, pause the video, figure this out. I assume you've paused the video and you're now back. So you started out at a 2000th at f1.4 and you want to go to 2/50th. Well, let's do that. Uh-oh, we don't have 2000th here. Well, you know the formula, right? The denominator doubles as you go. So it goes from a 1000th to 2000th to 4000th to 8000th, etc. Down here, it's going to go 1 second to 2 seconds to 4 seconds to 8 seconds, etc. So we're at 2000th. And we want to go to 2/50th, so that's 1, 2, 3 stops towards more light. 3 stops towards more light, that means I need 3 stops less light. So if we're at 1.4, which is just outside of here, right? Every other one doubles or halves. So 1, 2, 3. That's 3 stops towards less light. That balanced out the equation, right? So that would be f4. That means the 2000th at f1.4 is the same as 2/50th at f4. And again, why do you need to learn this stuff? Because you don't want your camera making these arbitrary decisions for you anymore. You want to be able to control it yourself and figure it out. This is kind of a limitation of some of the point and shoot cameras, because all you get to choose from is a flower icon or a portrait icon or the landscape icon. Now, mathematically, what's happening? If you have a point and shoot camera and you choose a landscape icon, your camera, as much as possible, is going to try to choose the f22, f16 side of the f-stop, allowing more stuff to be in focus. When you choose that portrait icon, it's going to try to choose f2, f2.8, f4, whatever your lowest f-stop number is to give you the shallowest depth of field. When you choose that little running man icon, your camera's trying to choose its fastest shutter speed, a 500th or 1,000th. And if you're shooting like that low light icon where you use a flash and has a picture of the moon or the Eiffel Tower or something, kind of represents night photography, means it's going to flash, but it's also going to drag the shutter so that it can record some of that ambient light, so it won't just be pitch black except for the flash hit the subject. We're going to teach you how to control that manually, so your camera's still not making, some kind of algorithmic or pre-programmed decision. We want to give you direct control over your vision. Let's do another one. Pause the video, do it yourself. Okay, so 1,000th of a second f2 to f22. Well, essentially, I've gone from the portrait icon to the landscape icon. Shooting manually with a DSLR or a very expensive point and shoot, I'm saying I don't want just one thing in focus. I don't want one flower and a field of flowers in focus. I want every flower in focus. So, f22, 1 stop, 2 stop, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 stops towards more light. That means I need 7 stops less light. and I was at 1,000th. Is that right? Think about that for a second. Which way did I just go? Very good. You figured it out. You said, wait, Gene. You weren't going from F22 to F2. We're going from F2 to F22. It matters which direction you start and finish at. So let's start here. You're at F2 and you're going to F22. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 stops toward less light. Now we're at 1,000th. Now I need to go 7 stops toward more light. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that'd be 1/8 of a second at F22. That means these two shots will look visually identical as far as their tonal range and brightness. However, over here, if something was moving, it's going to be frozen. Only one thing in the image is going to be in focus and everything else is going to be blurry. Over here on this side, everything's going to be in focus from where you stand to as far as you can see, and if it's moving, it's going to be blurry. If it's still, and you're on a tripod, then like the rocks and the trees will all be still, but the water or the waterfall will be blurry. Or the lights coming around a curve at nighttime, where the car disappears, but you just see the headlights or tail lights. This is kind of how you get those kind of shots. Let's go to the next one. 500th at 2.8 is the same as 60th at what? I assume now you're always pausing, so maybe I'll quit saying that. 500th to a 60th. 1, 2, 3 stops towards more light. That means we need 3 stops less light. 1, 2, 3. Should be F8. Let's go to the next one. 1/25th at 5.6 equals 1/30th at F whatever. So 1/25th, 1, 2. 2 stops toward more light. That means I need less light. 1, 2. That would be F11. 1/15th at F16 equals what at F2? I want to go from most everything in focus to only one thing in focus. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 stops towards what? More light or less light? More light, right? Tiny number, but big hole. I've already figured out how many stops that was. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 stops towards more light. That means we need less light on the shutter speed scale. We started here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That'll be 1,000th at F2. So here, there's some. If something's moving, it's going to be frozen. But primarily the choice is based on depth of field, so one thing's going to be in focus in this image. Next one. A 30th at F11 equals 1 what at F8. It's a simple movement, kind of in the middle of the scale. It's 1 stop towards more light. So I'll go up to a 30th, and I need less light, so I'll go up to a 60th here. So a 60th at F8 can be handheld. This shot cannot be handheld. Again, unless you have image stabilization or vibration reduction or some fancy expensive feature. Now remember, that feature costs a lot. It'd take a $300 lens and make it a $700 lens. Let's go down. Okay, I skipped down to this one. So a 30th at F11 is what at F4? F11, 1, 2, 3 stops toward more light. We were at a 30th, so we need 3 stops less light. 1, 2, 3. 1 to 50th. So again, couldn't hand hold. I can hand hold easily now, especially if I have a big zoom lens on. And also I've reduced my depth of field because I want to focus more on my subject. Here's a quiz. Pause this video so you can look at this and write down the answers. Here are the shutter speeds and f-stops for that quiz. Here are the answers for the bottom part. What you need to notice as you're checking your answers is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All 9 of these shots would look identical. So you put your camera on a tripod and you're able to get these general readings. Remember, every time you get 2,000th, you won't have 1.4. Every time you're at 1/8, it won't be only f22. This is a relative example I'm showing you that will change 100 times as you point your camera in 100 different directions. Remember, it's all about balancing light. So essentially, if I'm shutting one window in my house and I only have 2 windows, then this window's wide open, this one's mostly closed. And down here, this window's mostly closed and this window is mostly open. It's just balancing light. but all 9 of these shots are going to look identical as far as tonal range. They're all going to be equally bright. So what you're doing is you're saying, well, in this top image that I shot at f1.4 at 2,000th of a second, either time and duration were important. I wanted to freeze something that was moving fast, like my kid jumping off a diving board, some sporting event, throwing the bouquet, and you wanted to freeze that. Or you wanted a very shallow depth of field to focus in on your subject, like a close-up portrait, an abstract, that kind of thing. Down at this side, f22, either you wanted everything in focus from where you stand to as far as you can see, or you wanted some kind of controlled blur. Like if you set up your tripod beside a stream and you want the stream to be nice and creamy and blurry while the rock and the trees are razor sharp. These are the controls you'll have. But again, they're incidental. What do I mean by that? I mean, if I wrote down f22 at 1/2000th of a second, what would you think? What would I be shooting? I'd be shooting an incredibly bright day, right? Because I've shut down both windows in my house as much as possible. So maybe I'm on a beach and it's 100 degrees and bright direct sunlight, and I'm on a white beach that has white sand, reflecting light everywhere. And then I might need to have that kind of a crazy shutter speed f-stop combination. What if you saw an eighth of a second at 1.4? Or what if you saw 3 seconds at 1.4? That means both windows in my house are wide open. What am I probably shooting? Probably shooting something at nighttime, right? And I'm trying to let in as much light as possible. So these are all relative numbers to what you're metering. Here you go. Do this one. And again, the answers are what we just looked at. I hope this has helped.